Hello, everyone. I am Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire podcast. Welcome back to a new episode. And maybe you've noticed that we moved to Gnostic TV and we left YouTube behind. We are just going to promote the clips for each interview on YouTube, but our home right now is Gnostic TV. All you need is registration, then the episodes are free as before. Find out more at spiritualinspired.ca and also at gnostictv.com. My guest today is Adrian Emery. He comes all the way from Australia. Adrian, thank you for joining me today.
Good morning, Claudiu. Thank you so much for having me.
You are a successful entrepreneur, author, and personal counselor. And you did all this from, as I mentioned, Australia. And I interviewed wonderful people from down under. So you are one of them.
Thank you. Thank you.
I read about in your bio that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you developed several health/vegetarian cafes and restaurants along the eastern seaboard of Australia. Do you consider that period the foundation for society's awakening to a better standard of living?
Oh, definitely. I was talking to someone about this the other day, and we were comparing that era, which is around about, say, 50 years ago, if we talk about the early 70s, and now as both being pivotal times. And I use the analogy, I've turned my desk around so people can enjoy a little bit of the light in the garden behind me. And I started with a bare paddock, and I used to walk into the bush and get little gum nuts because you can't transplant Australian natives. They're only that big. Whereas now, some of those trees are 40 meters tall. But the point I was making is that I needed to be able to recognize what sort of tree that seedling would grow into. And similarly, I think that we sowed the seeds 50 years ago for the transformation that is still going on, even though after that initial period, it seemed to go into recession. And I know a lot of us thought, well, really, did we really make any difference? But I think that now, even though we are going through very, very turbulent and apparently or seemingly negative times, I think that those seeds that were planted 50 years ago are blossoming now, and that not only many people, but many things have come to fruition. I mean, for example, looking at just purely vegetarianism, I was interviewed on national ABC television back then, and the question was, if you don't eat meat, what do you eat? That's how revolutionary and radical it was. Whereas now, it's mainstream. Pretty much every restaurant, wherever you go, not only vegetarian, you can get vegan, you can get gluten-free. This is just a part and parcel of life. And similarly, I think a lot of other things that have happened over that intervening 50 years had their roots back in that time. So definitely, I think it was a very, very pivotal time in the evolution of humanity.
And how important do you think is for a family to have its own plot of land, no matter how big, and grown their own food, even if it's, a handful of tomatoes and two cucumbers and some dill? How important is that for the family?
Oh, I think absolutely, absolutely pivotal. I mean, I have devoted my life to the garden that I have built behind us. Now, not everybody needs to have a 10-acre garden or a big plot of land. I say, look, even if you have a pot plant on a balcony, and I think that reconnecting with nature is absolutely essential. Nature is the doorway, and I really believe that that is where humanity got lost when we disconnected from an agrarian, community-based, village-type lifestyle. We had urbanization with the Industrial Revolution. People moved to very, very large cities, completely disconnected from nature. And we lost that feeling of oneness. And I noticed that, you say in your homepage, that it's about love, gratitude, and oneness. I think that that oneness must come via nature. whether you're growing vegetables, whether it's a little plant, whatever it is, we need to reconnect with the seasons, because the seasons are the flow. That's how we learn, because everybody knows in an agrarian culture that, you need to move with the seasons, and the seasons teach you humility and also how to adapt. So yes, I believe that it is absolutely essential. And the second part is, it's great to grow something that you can eat because it tastes different. It's very good for your metabolism and your body. But as I said, more than that, it creates this appreciation, this oneness, this connection with nature, which then goes through to oneness and a holistic understanding.
Yes, I agree with you. And to give you an example, today I decided to make a zucchini soup. So I just had huge zucchini from my backyard. I got the dill. I walk out. I got the dill and the cilantro. The tomatoes were from the garden. So in half an hour, I put everything together. I could feed my family, and they were ecstatic. And I think this separation from nature with the 15-minute cities and all this legislation and made up climate change laws is done in purpose to divide us and to separate us from nature. Yes, there is climate emergency, but not necessarily from what they are saying. It's from solar interaction, is from us polluting at a certain level, but I don't think the cows have anything to do with it, or the farmers who provide the food, because they learn how to grow food in a very sustainable and efficient way. And I mentioned another shows that I came across, the Ringing Cedars books, and they mentioned that in Russia, a law was put forward in 2001, 2002 for every single family to receive 1 hectare of land, which is 2.25 acres, if they wanted
Wow,
to.
fantastic.
And that was for free for them to build a house and grow their own food, become self-sustainable, tax-free, and you won't find anything like that in the West. So
No.
it's quite interesting.
Well, I think you've covered quite a few points there. I'll try to remember them sequentially. I think the first thing, going back to your zucchini and tomato soup, that in your trilogy, which is love, gratitude, and oneness, gratitude is the missing piece. And when you go into the garden, pick those vegetables, go into the kitchen, prepare them, and then give them lovingly to your family, the missing ingredient is gratitude. And going back to my life, as when I started with my restaurants, I realized, and this was before Like Water for Chocolate, before Chef Celebrity, before putting love into the food, I realized that the most important ingredient was my energy going into the food. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you did that exact same exercise, but walked down to the supermarket and bought some zucchinis and some tomatoes and garlic or whatever and came back and cooked, you would not have the same appreciation and connection with nature that going and picking, because it's not just picking, it's all the work that you've done in terms of weeding and planting and watering and nurturing and looking after, and then nature rewards you with this lovely, fresh, beautiful tasting food. And that is the connection. Then we move on to exactly what you said. I believe that it is very, very deliberate, this divorce, this disconnection, this disunity, taking humanity out of nature, because we are so much easier to control. So that's a fantastic concept that Russia has, that, as I said before, if we can return to some sort of simpler lifestyle. I find it quite amazing that in all of this conversation about global warming, no one ever talks about planting trees. We always talk about fossil fuels. We always talk about all these methanes and different things, but we don't address the basic issue that I can't remember exactly what it is, but we're sort of decimating, I think it's 2 or 3 football fields a minute of of rainforest. And so we are creating a huge imbalance between the animals, and we are an animal. In other words, we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, and anything that is green breathes in carbon dioxide and breathes out oxygen. So it's a fairly simple equation that we are just ignoring and only looking at the fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide is essential. Carbon dioxide is essential for green life, but we need to build up that green life matter to balance what we are doing as humans. And if we did that, I personally don't think we would really need to worry that much. I like to call it global warning rather than global warming. I think the planet is warning us, saying to humanity, stop, you're really on the wrong path. You are creating havoc here and destabilizing what took 4,600 billion years to create this harmonious ecosystem within which we live. And in less than 100 years, we have completely disrupted it. So yes, I think that it's a very essential for our spiritual, mental, psychological, and emotional well-being that we get back to nature.
Yes, and not only that we cut trees at this amazing rate, but the genius, which is Bill Gates, wants to cut even more and also cover the sun. So he has a brilliant mind and he wants to do everything by himself. And we should be thankful that
Of
he
course.
wants to take care of us. Yes.
By 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Thank you so much, sir, for telling me that I'm going to be happy. You know, like, you be happy. It's an
Adrian,
order.
yes, I would like to switch towards your books and how can we attain personal sovereignty, please?
Okay, so Personal Sovereignty is book one in a trilogy that I call the Temple of Understanding. There are many commentators at the moment looking at life or what the geopolitical events that are happening on the planet from a political perspective, an economic perspective, a cultural perspective, a social perspective. I'm calling myself a philosopher because I think sometimes we need to look at it from a much higher perspective as to what is going on, which is what we have just been discussing. So for me, step one is personal sovereignty. We need to take back our own right, our ability to make our own decisions, to be sovereign, to think for ourselves, to have critical thinking, and to be able to make decisions. In other words, to steer our own ship. Unfortunately, one of the really big things that is happening on the planet is obviously social media, mass media, the false narrative that is just herding us into this clone type reality where we're not really thinking for ourselves. And we're losing that ability to choose our own destiny. One of my sayings is decisions determine destiny. So we need to make our own decisions. Most human beings are not good at making decisions and are not good at making the right decision. So personal sovereignty is all about being able to listen to yourself, to tune into your inner being, to know who you are, and to make decisions that are right for you. Tao Tuning, which is the book that I'm releasing right now, then goes, okay, once I know where I want to go, how do I actually get there? How do I execute my life? How do I execute those decisions and act accordingly? So I think the personal sovereignty is the foundation, because if you can't think for yourself, if you can't make your own sovereign decisions, meaning free from external influences. I mean, it's interesting, most people, when they need to make a decision, immediately turn to somebody else and go, what do you think? What should I do? Listen, rather than, I think what you need to do is eliminate everything. Don't even think. Just go within, get very quiet, go into a meditative space, and it is amazing. The answer will just be there. So I think that sovereignty, personal sovereignty, is essential as the first step.
Yes, and I think we miss intuition just because of the noise you mentioned with the social media and everything else that surrounds us, and we look validation outside us instead of inside. And with everything that's going on, we look at that, Big Daddy, which is the government, and I'm bashing them every time I have the opportunity, but in a very lovely way, you know.
Yes. We
So
don't want to get too involved in the negativity.
of course not, of course not. And I'm trying to again send my love during my meditations as much as
Yes.
possible, again to the right figure heads up there. Hopefully they
Yeah.
will change gears and they will start caring about humanity in general and Mother Earth. So yeah.
Well, I just recently reread 1984 by George Orwell, who was the uh, creator of the word Big Brother. And I really struggled reading it because it was so depressing and so accurate. And I thought, how did this guy back in 1948, that's why he called it 1984, because he just reversed the dates. I thought, in 1948, there was no television, there was certainly no monitors, but his clear vision of what we are living through is almost 100%. I encourage anybody who hasn't read it or has read it to reread it again. It's very, very interesting. And yes, so we certainly live within a surveillance state, and certainly we are being herded into this mass consciousness of just being compliant, of being docile, of not being able to think for ourselves, not being sovereign. And that's why I wrote Personal Sovereignty.
Yes, and
And going on to Dart tuning, sorry, to be able to flow, one must be true to the self. If you can't listen to yourself, then you can't get into your own flow.
and there's also the lack of understanding that we are not our bodies. We identify with our bodies and we think that our thoughts is what represents us. And this is again another discrepancy and the story that is being pushed onto us. And the more we being detached from the concept of God, spirit, divinity, this is when this abyss is getting even deeper and deeper. And the best example is the opening of the Olympics in Paris. We saw the mocking. We saw what happened, and I think these guys on the right, on the left side, they are quite afraid of the teachings of what Christ consciousness means through Yeshua's teachings, in fact. Because if we understand those teachings at a deeper level, then all this nonsense and noise from social media won't matter to us.
Yeah. And look, I love the saying, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Unfortunately, like a lot of the things that Christ said, have been completely misunderstood. I don't think he was saying, I am the truth and the light, and you're not. I am the way, the truth, and the light for me. You are the way and the truth and the light for you. Every single one of us needs to be our own light, our own way, our own truth. And it is such an important concept to get through, as you say, this another thing that I think is really, really important, as you just alluded to, is that, yes, well, I think the essence of Christ consciousness is this oneness. I and the Father are one. But again, we misinterpret or misunderstand that, thinking that these people, whether it's Jesus Christ or Buddha or whomever, are different to us, rather than what they have all been trying to show us, that we are all one, that we are all part of this divinity. But of course, that is not what the elite want us to know and understand, because then we will be that much harder to control and herd if we start thinking for ourselves, making our own decisions, and trusting our inner divinity. Because for me, the most important thing is your precious individuality. That is your divine gift. That is who you are. You are an aspect of divine consciousness. So obviously that's anathema to, this globalist agenda of just having a herd of sheep that they can move around and, control.
And how do you see stopping this degradation and turn the ship around? Because the biggest the filth at the bottom, the more encouragement they receive from the top. And those like us who point the obvious are becoming targets.
Well, look, have you heard of the 100th monkey? Do you know what the 100th monkey is?
I think I did, but I cannot remember right now on this
Okay, I'll
context.
very quickly go through the story, which is that there was some scientists studying a breed of chimpanzee or monkeys, I'm not sure what, on an island, a Polynesian island. And they noticed these monkeys ate mainly yams or sweet potatoes, which they dug out of the sand, and they had a lot of sand on them. One particular monkey started washing the sweet potato or the yam in the water before it ate it, and pretty quickly most of the other monkeys on that island also started copying. But what they observed, what other scientists on another island, which was completely disconnected and no way that the monkeys on the second island could see the monkeys on the first island, they started washing their yams as well. So that's the concept of the 100th monkey, which basically means that when enough members of a species change, then that change becomes species wide. So the way that I look at it is we need to reach a critical mass, a threshold. I think that's probably about 1 billion people, that start to think differently, that start to attune into their personal sovereignty, their inner divinity, their Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it, start thinking for themselves and start putting out this message of peace, love, gratitude, oneness. Then if you think of a seesaw, then the scales start to tip. I think that all one can do is to really focus on the positive and build that positivity rather than criticizing or going to war or lamenting the negative. The way I look at it, the negative is going to destroy itself. I mean, the elite will destroy this society. So, going back to your point about the zucchinis and Russia wanting people, we need to return to a more attuned and sustainable way of living with nature. And I think that's what's going to happen. We just have to live in hope.
Yes, and going back to or addressing the human nature, because we talk about it, both Australians and Canadians are known as and perceived all over the world that we are gentle men and women, and we are not prone to start a fight or participate in wars. And both nations have a high percentage of immigrants that live in harmony with one another. So why do you think the governments of both countries behaved with such impunity during COVID years? I mean, the police was brutal, the mandates were draconic, and there was no empathy or common sense behind any of their decision.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I 100% believe that COVID was a deliberate policy strategy. I don't think COVID really presented the inherent danger that it was broadcast as. I think the figures were quite fraudulent. I think it was very carefully orchestrated and manipulated. I mean, one of my favorite sayings is have the guts to join the dots. You've only got to use your critical thinking to watch. And when you see, as you said, the whole of the world, countries all over the world, almost instantaneously coming out with the same messages, with the same laws, with the same attitudes, with everything going, no, this has got to be orchestrated to be so well coordinated. I think it was a trial run. I think this was when the elite really wanted to see, okay, how far can we go? How far can we turn everything off? How far can we create this domination? I mean, if you think about it, you're 100% right. Even if we just look at countries like Canada and Australia, which are some of the most liberal and peaceful, loving people on the planet, we had the worst lockdowns. Victoria and you in particular, I'm not sure of which states, but particularly in Canada, unbelievable. So I just think it was a trial run to, I think the thing that amazed me the most was the willingness of the average person to just abide. I mean, if you think about the freedoms, there was no freedom to move, no freedom to go to work, no freedom to communicate, no freedom to congregate, no freedom to speak your say. Anybody, particularly professors or scientists or doctors, all of the people in with any sort of academic qualifications who resisted that narrative were absolutely cancelled and made a mockery of. Whereas now, today, more and more studies are coming out showing that the masks did not work, the pushing people inside did not work, the closing the economy down. I read somewhere the other day that the cost of COVID was $17 trillion. Now, that $17 trillion was a direct movement from the people to the elite. That $17 trillion went into the pockets of some people and went out of basically the taxation system of the free world. So that's a massive movement and consolidation of power and money.
Yes, it was a decimation of small businesses, because a small
Yes.
business, in my opinion, doesn't receive more than, let's say, 100 to 200 customers a day. If it's not a bakery or other type of shop like a barber shop, but 100 to 200 is, let's say, it's an average, maybe above average. So a Costco or a Walmart receives thousands of customers every single day. So how can you explain that you close a business which can control the customers in and out, but you don't close the Walmart? And
It's very simple, very simple. Look, and I talk about this a lot in personal sovereignty. You have to look, as I said at the very beginning of this conversation, you have to be able to take a higher perspective. So you have to have and that's why I call myself now a philosopher. You have to be able to look at the bigger picture and the long term. So a democratic capitalist society, which basically says that it believes in the freedom of the individual, is 100% dependent upon the middle class. As the middle class grows, then you have a strong capitalist free market system, and you also have a democratic system. So if you want to destroy that whole paradigm, you must eliminate the middle class. Now, the middle class, as you say, is the small to medium business, the shop owner, the barber, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, not the Costco's, not the big businesses. The big businesses are all owned by BlackRock and the elite. But when we look at the basic middle class, so as you bankrupt that middle class, you actually do. We don't live in a democratic capitalist society anymore. Not in Canada, not in Australia. I mean, they have tinkered so much with the free market system. I mean, for example, I don't want to get too distracted into economics, but your interest rate is the basic price lever in a capitalist society because it is the price of capital. Once you start artificially repressing and suppressing that interest rate, the whole thing gets completely manipulated, topsy-turvy, and all prices become arbitrary and irrelevant to a certain extent. So I see it as a very, very deliberate strategy to weaken the middle class and destroy capitalism. There is, as I said, we do not live in a free democratic world. I mean, for example, how can you, people, the truck drivers that protested in Canada had their bank accounts frozen. I mean, that is not capitalism, and that is not democratic.
No, that's mafioso style. And looks
Yeah,
like Trudeau is very good at that. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
And I
So
just listened today to a video in which the host explained that the Canadian banks are in big trouble and they need $16 billion a month to have cash and be able to function. And who's going to give them the cash? Bank of Canada. And if you ask one question to the governor or the CEO of Corporation of Canada, which is Trudeau, where do you get the cash from? He'll say, I'll print. But why I cannot print the money or the currency and you can? Just because you have a nicer ink and paper, I can get some nice ink and paper. I can print the currency. What gives you the right? It's a big Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, it is a big Ponzi scheme. And again, it is bankrupting the middle class because, again, the middle class, I mean, if you think about it in very, very simplistic terms, the lower class tend to live off social security and handouts from the government. The very, very wealthy tend to minimize their tax. So it is basically the bulk of the middle class that the tax revenue comes from. And when they say they print money, they don't print money. Well, they do print money, but it just becomes inflation.
Yes.
So we all pay for it out of our taxes. We all pay for it out of this. And when they say, oh, inflation is 3 or 4%, I mean, that is ridiculous. Anybody, as I said, I've been a restaurateur all my life. I know when I go shopping, I'm pretty good. I can look at a basket of goods and I can go, that should be about $40. And it's at least 60, 70. And I'm talking, so this is over, say, 2 or 3 years. So I would say, and most economists agree, that we are looking, when I say we, I'm talking about the Western world, so Canada, Australia, America, the EU, England. I would estimate that we're looking at about 12% inflation per year. Now, if the government turned around and said to the people, we are now going to increase your taxes by 12% a year, there would be hell to play. But because it's in inflation and because they keep changing the basket of goods and again manipulating the figures to say, oh, inflation's only 3 or 4%, where in actual fact it's 12%, it's just disguised theft,
Yes, and I think you are nice because I look at certain products and it's way above 20%. Just the salt for the water softener, it went up 80%. I was paying $5.49, now is $9.49. So some products are way, way above the 12% or even 20%. And yes, we are losing purchasing power.
And as soon as something goes up a lot, they just take it out of the basket. So
Exactly.
if you use, I mean, I studied economics at university, and it used to be called a basket of goods. And that basket consisted of what you ate and used. So now they think, oh, well, we better take food out because food's gone up too much. Or we better take fuel out because fuel's gone up too much. So they keep taking out everything from this basket that we don't really use to artificially. So that's what I'm saying. When you look at the two biggest, what can I call them, drivers of the democratic capitalist system, the first is interest rates, which have been artificially repressed for too long, from basically almost a 20-year period. The second big indicator is inflation, which is the rate at which the price of goods is going up. Both of these have been manipulated and played with at our expense.
Indeed. Adrian, I would like to switch to something much more positive and maybe much more happier than
Spiritual.
this discussion. Spiritual, yes. You talk a lot about the Temple of Understanding, and one temple which I can think of is our body. So we don't have to defile it; we have to take care of it. But I think you also has a different meaning for this Temple of Understanding.
Yes, but I do totally agree with you, because going back firstly to this concept of connection with nature, ultimately each person's first connection with nature is our body, and we are in such denial that we are a social animal. We are in such denial that our bodies are physical, that our bodies are a part of nature, that if we want to get back to nature, the first thing is to get back into your body, to feel it, to honor it, to treat it as the temple that it is, going back to your zucchini soup, by nurturing it, by honoring it, by loving it, by, treating it well. But yes, the temple of understanding, although I wouldn't necessarily say it's that different. I think that and I talk about this a lot in the very first page of why did I call it the temple of understanding? Because I wanted to make the point that we are not all religions have a very specific, so any Christian religion talks about a church, or we talk about a mosque, or we talk about a synagogue, or we talk about, each of those buildings is connected. But a temple to me has nothing to do with any religion. It is just that it is a structure that is really built for truth. So I'm not, I chose the word temple because I was saying that the temple of understanding is that we live within an incredible misunderstanding. All these things that we're talking about are misunderstandings that have been portrayed on humanity for thousands of years. And we now need to break out of those misunderstandings and come to the temple of truth, which I want to see agnostically, not because I don't believe in the divinity, but because I think that most religions, I mean, if you look at it historically, nearly all wars are based on some sort of religion or philosophy, or, us and them, and, I'm a different color, or I'm a different race, or whatever. So I like to, I would like to see humanity understanding the oneness of us as a species, and then our oneness with all of life. So
Yes.
the temple of understanding is very much a shaking off and a breaking free from all these erroneous beliefs and concepts that are clouding our ability to see reality clearly.
Yes, and to me, a temple is a place of initiation. Could be a very subtle nuance from a church or a synagogue. But again, just the notion of temple, I associate with pretty much Egypt and antiquity. And they were going there to initiate people in certain teachings, in mysteries. And they're becoming wiser. They will follow the priestesses and the priests, and they will deepen their understanding of who they were and how they can work with energies, work with the, let's say, extraterrestrials, with portals. So there is something that is missing in any edifice of religion nowadays.
Yes, I think that's a really important concept. And that's the point that I made before, that I talk a lot about a paradigm where humanity is going through a paradigm shift. Now, whenever we look at any of these ancient civilizations, or alternatively at any of the indigenous civilizations that we so carefully erased, all of their temples, their religions, their cosmology, and their philosophy understood nature, understood the divinity of a nature, the sun god. We call them pagans, but as opposed to the Judeo-Christian ethic. But paganism really is the ultimate religion or spirituality, whatever you want to call it, because it understands that creation is divine, and it's an expression of God. Nature is, I like to say that the closer you are to nature, the closer you are to God. So you're right that all of these ancient civilizations that erected these temples, the temples were to uplift, to create this consecration and connection with the divine, with the universe, with the larger universality of everything. Whereas in the West, in the Judeo-Christian ethic, we have taken God out of creation, put God into some, heaven or place somewhere else, and made this disconnection. So that, you're right. That is why I chose the word temple to create a consecration and an understanding of the truth and the oneness of every single life form.
And we also have to remember that certain pagan customs were included in the Roman Catholic Church processes and procedures and everything else because they wanted to appease to a large mass of people. And they took them, they massage it a little bit, and they put them in. So it's pretty much the same thing, but people don't realize that.
Yeah, Easter was most of our holy days, or whatever you want to call them, Christmas and Easter, they were originally pagan dates, and a lot of it was based on the seasons. So the changing from summer to winter or spring, the equinoxes, all of these things. I mean, if you think about it, and the more you study ancient civilizations, their understanding of cosmology, of the stars, of the rhythms, the larger rhythms of nature, meaning that in the solar system, etc., were incredibly profound and astute.
Yes, indeed. Adrian, I want to ask you a question which I ask every single guest from Australia. In fact, there are two in one. What was your experience when you visited Uluru? Because I assume you visited the location. And second, have you interacted? Have you had the opportunity and the happiness to interact with Indigenous people in Australia?
Great, lovely questions. Thank you. Okay, Uluru is quite unbelievable. I have traveled extensively in my life right around the world. Yeah, Uluru is, I can't even find a word, and I'm a wordsmith, to describe it. It is huge. It's a monolith. I mean, it's this massive stone. I'm sure every one of your viewers has probably seen a photograph of it. But it is just something that stands there within its own right. You know what I mean? It's like, I am here. I am this unbelievable monolith of stone, beautiful colors at sunset. On the other hand, quite sad, because up until recently, and I'm talking very recently, maybe within a year or two, people were allowed to climb it, and there was a lot of desecration, a lot of rubbish, and they put spikes and chains so that people could pull themselves up. So the normal tourist thing of, no sacredness, no real appreciation of the magnificence of this being. Uluru is definitely one of the portals of the planet. There is no doubt about that. The second part to your question of the interaction on a personal level and also from a societal level, no, I would have to say I haven't had a lot of personal interaction with Aboriginals. It's a travesty in Australia, but what has happened again historically with colonialization in Canada, in Australia, in America, wherever the colonists and Christians went, they completely disrupted the paradigm of these people. So it's very hard for them, meaning the Indigenous Aborigines, to get back to their roots and their culture, which they are doing quite well. We now have a huge movement in Australia where we're honouring the Aboriginal culture very, very well, but it is still difficult. And I'll give you a very small example of that. I live in the mountains in the country, and we do have a lot of trouble with bushfires. I've been through 7 bushfires, and the Aborigines have what they call a cold burn, a slow burn. They managed the whole of the Australian continent for 40,000 years by using fire. We should, and I'm talking about right here where I live, we have what's called an RFS, which is a rural fire brigade. That should be manned by Aboriginal people. They should be put in charge. We should actually get right out of it and say, guys, you just look after the earth. You look after Australia. You look after the continent. You tell us, you decide, you're sovereign, and you are in charge. And I would really love that. But to answer your question, to find native Aboriginal people in, say, Sydney or in the cities that have not been corrupted is very, very difficult.
Yes, is that arrogance we have that we know everything and we can improve and become and make everything more efficient, but in the end we still don't understand what we are doing.
No. I mean, I don't know if you've read, there are a couple of books that you see that, again, the false narrative is that the Aboriginals, I'm talking about now about the Australian Aboriginals, were, would go on walkabout, but that they weren't gardeners. It's actually 100% incorrect. They were quite good cultivators. A lot of the original settlers said that it was quite verdant, that they were looked after the Australian continent very, very well. So again, we've diametrically switched the whole thing around to suit our narrative, to make out as if, they're pagans, they're savages, they needed to be colonized, they needed to be Christianized and baptized, all this rubbish, just basically to justify our stealing of the land.
And their extermination at the same time. Yeah. Adrian, what is your daily spiritual practice, please?
Very good question. I believe that one must have a daily regime. For me, and I say this to everybody, I like to be awake and meditating for the first bird. Okay, so because for me, that first moment of consciousness is the seed of the day. Now, obviously, that time changes during the seasons. At the moment, it might be, say, 5:30 to 6. We're in the middle of winter, but in the middle of summer, that could be 3:30, 4 o'clock, where that initial dawn time. So I'm usually awake, and I'm alert, and I'm in a meditative state, and I like to really, because to me that's appreciating, and those birds are singing the song. It's like morning has broken. It's like their call of joy. So that's my first daily practice, and I think it is essential because, as I said, that is the seed of the day. I really discourage people from falling back into what I call the psychic soup, where you're half awake, half asleep, drifting backwards and forwards, and then you wake up exhausted. So I find that if you do have the mental discipline and acuity, as soon as you come back into consciousness, and the second thing that is important there is to stop the thinking mind. In other words, not to let the mind immediately go to what happened yesterday, what am I going to do today? Do not go into the past or the future. Just absolutely focus, whether you use meditation or mindfulness or whatever you want to call it, but have that presence to stop. Then I try to meditate for as long as I can. And again, that will depend on the agitation or how peaceful I am. If I'm lucky, I might last an hour, but I don't force it. So in other words, it needs to be natural. And I know when if I'm thinking, then get up and go. I like to do something, so that could be a yoga session or walking in my garden, something that is active, something that is positive, but something that is, again, healing for my body. If I talk about my perfect day, then I would probably have a couple of hours gardening, where I'm doing something with, again, connecting with nature, trying to be there, trying to be in the present, not thinking about what I'm going to be doing in that day. Then I'll come back in, have a healthy breakfast. Then I try in the morning to have several hours at my desk where I'm writing or doing something creative, and then and I don't get distracted. I won't go into my inbox or communicate or do phone calls or anything. I try to consecrate that time for whether I'm writing or planning or whatever I'm doing. And then after that session, I'll have what I call a community. And I ran many, many big businesses, and I used to train my staff to do this, to compartmentalize your day, to not go all over the place and, be answering every email or phone call. Go into your inbox. This is when you're, if you're running a business, check it, see if there's anything really urgent, come out of it, do your creative work. But again, you need to find your own flow. My creative time is early morning. I think that's pretty usual for most people. Some people find their creative time to be later in the evening. Then have a communication time, and then later on in the day, I'll go back and work in the garden. So I think the discipline is really and that's why I called the book The Art of Flow. I want to spend as much time as I possibly can in the flow, in the moment. I call it being now. I think it has to be a 24/7 discipline where you are not allowing your mind, I call it the yama yama of the thinking mind that is just going round and round. I think that's a constant discipline. I loved your trilogy of love, gratitude, and oneness, because I think that if one is perceiving the beauty of nature, and the beauty of nature doesn't actually have to be out in the garden. I mean, you can be gazing into the face of a loved one. You can be cooking your zucchini soup, for example. But if you are mindful, if you are present, if you are grateful, then joy arises spontaneously. That gratitude, that joy, that exuberance, that fun just happens. And it's interesting that, we tend to think that when we use the word love, that we need an object, that I love you, or I love my pet, or I love this, or I love that. I think love is a state of being that actually is better if it does not have an object. In other words, that love should just be a state of being that one resides in. The love and the gratitude then lead to the oneness. So my daily discipline, I suppose, is to spend as much time in that state of now and in that state of oneness as I possibly can. And I think that to do that, the art is that you must keep changing, not fritting all over the place, but there's a maximum amount of time, for example, that you can sit at your desk and be creative. And when that's over, you got to go and do something else. So I try to balance my day, as I said before, with then I'll go and do some activity. But if I'm doing hard work in the garden, there's also a limit, before my back starts going or something. So I think there needs to be a natural rhythm. We are all multifaceted beings. In other words, we have families, we have business, we have daily chores, we have housekeeping, and it's really important to try and balance all of those different aspects of your life so that nothing gets out of kilter. In other words, we all can become obsessive about our work and neglect our family or neglect ourselves. So there's got to be a very healthy, harmonious rhythm and balance to each and every day, to a week, and to a year. I think that it's just a very important. For example, if you multiply 24/7, it's 168 hours in a week. I tend to determine at regular intervals how I want to allocate those 168 hours into the different areas of my life. So to my spirituality, to my creativity, to my family, to my nourishment, to, rest and relaxation. And I'm pretty good at, keeping track of that and focusing. Now those hours change. And if I recommend to everybody that if you actually do that, there is a lot of time in a day and a lot of time in a week. Again, one of my favorite sayings is that there is always more than enough. There's always more than enough time. There's always more than enough love. There's always more than enough abundance. There's always more than enough joy. All one has to do is to be a little bit, not strict, not talking about being obsessive or anal or, but just try and be a little bit sensible and intelligent about, and this goes back to your question about personal sovereignty. What do I want to achieve in my life? What do I want my life to look like? What is important to me? What are the goals that I want to achieve? And then how much time am I going to allocate to each of those areas in a week, in a month, in a year to be successful?
Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing such an extensive experience and how you stretch out your day. What are your plans for the remaining 2024 that might interest the viewers?
For 2024?
Yes.
Well, okay, and as an example of what you just asked me, so one of my major goal for 2024 was to publish Tao Tuning. I had written it several years ago, and I just felt that it was time to get it out into the world. So I'm in the middle of the year. It is now July, and it's very important to me to do that. So that's a very big project for me, and it is consuming a lot of time because as a self-publisher, you've got to finish it, proof it, edit it, get the typesetting done, get the cover done. All that stuff has to happen. Then you've got to do this work, which is the publicity and organizing it to get it out. I lead as I said in the answer to your last question. I mean, I have a 10-acre garden out there, which is pretty demanding. 10 acres is quite large, and it demands a lot of love and attention if you want to keep it. For example, not this weekend, but last weekend we had a huge blizzard. So every square inch of my garden was covered in sticks and litter and leaves. I've had to rake the whole lot. I've picked up thousands and thousands of twigs. So the seasons also determine what I need to do. As it is now July, we are just about to move into spring. Spring is a very important time. And going back to the beginning of our conversation, I do this quite consciously and deliberately because, as I said, I believe that where humanity got lost is in the divorce from nature. So I have deliberately, if you like, subjected myself to being the servant of nature to make me get back into that rhythm. So the garden for me is a living, working demonstration of the question that you asked me before: should everybody have a little garden? 100% yes. I am not encouraging people to do what I have done, but I guess I had to do that in order to get all these concepts into my mind and to understand how it was going to change my psyche. I can honestly say now in my life, after 50 years, I've been planting the garden for 50 years, that I can walk out there and I can merge my consciousness at will with the consciousness of the garden, with the consciousness of nature. So it's a very important discipline, daily discipline, that I probably ignored to put into that last question, that pretty much every dawn and every dusk, I will go for a walk. And it's a mindful walk. So I am not thinking, I am attuning, I am watching, I am observing, I am participating, I am becoming one with nature, and I am allowing nature to nourish me, to feed me, and I am expanding my consciousness. What else do I want to do in 2024? Look, I have developed a bit of a fascination for the American election. I think that it's an unbelievable soap opera. Hollywood could not have scripted it any better. And I think it is an encapsulation, and it epitomizes everything that is going wrong. And I know we don't want to go back into all of that story again. So I'm watching that with quite a degree of acuteness and intelligence to watch what is going on the planet, because it's a good, as I said, it's a litmus test. It's a good indicator. I'd like to have a holiday before the end of the year, and I think that's pretty much it for my goals for 2024. But certainly the most important one is probably not even writing the book, but doing this, getting my message out there, talking to podcast hosts like yourself. And I very much appreciate the work that you guys do, because you are the conduit, you are the ability, the medium whereby people like myself, going back to your question before, is, how do we create this change? I think we create this change by just speaking up.
Yes.
There's a lot of noise out there. Unfortunately, the internet has a lot of negativity on it. Social media is pushing a lot of cloning. So I think that voices like my voice and your voice, and people who are using the technology to incrementally change, little bit, one person at a time, changing that little bit. If someone can learn a little bit from my words and change their day or change their perspective, that's really important to me. So I will be devoting the rest of this year to promoting Dao tuning as a means to hopefully raise human consciousness. I do believe that we are going through this. And just to emphasize what we were talking about before, I'm very positive. I am very optimistic. I think that humanity is going through this amazing spiritual transformation, that we are going to come out the other side. I don't think we're going to go into a dystopian future. I think we are actually going to go into a most beautiful spiritual future, where every single human being will appreciate and understand their own inherent divinity and be able to listen to themselves, and that we will live in a world of oneness where we can cooperate. I mean, the biggest problem in the world today is war. It's just insane. This killing. I mean, I was thinking about it. I think I was washing up actually last night, and I was thinking, why would you want to kill someone?
Because it makes money. That's why. It makes money.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about it from an individual perspective. If one message, I thought I'd really like to get people to stop and go, why would you do it? Why? Because it's not just making money. I mean, I don't know about in Canada, but right now in Australia, we have a pandemic of domestic violence. There are, sorry, I can't remember the statistic, but a woman, meaning at home by her spouse, by a member of her family, is getting killed. It's unbelievable. It's out of control. So this killing is not just, or the guy that tried to assassinate President Trump,
yes,
ex-President Trump. This is not about money. This is about, I don't like you. I don't like the color of your skin, or I don't like your ethos, or I don't like your politics, or I don't like whatever it is. I'm going to kill you. I mean, I just want people to stop and think about that concept. That is a ridiculous concept. Because I don't like you, I'm going to kill you. I mean,
yes.
we really need to me, that's the antithesis of the sanctity of life, every single, or that I'm going to go and chop down a tree, or that I'm going to go and kill an animal, okay. I mean, to a certain extent, we do need to, you need to pull your zucchini, we need to pull a carrot, we need to eat. But that's a very, very different concept to killing for the sake of killing. And yes, if somebody is attacking you and you need to defend yourself, I think but this senseless killing, and as you say, the wars that are just purely for money, to take territory, to take treasure, to take resources, to take oil, to take whatever it is that the conquerors, the colonists want to take, is money. Greed is a terrible thing.
Yes, and I agree with you that we are going towards a wonderful time in humanity's history and development. It's going to be a bumpy road, but in the end, we're going to reach that point. And to the war idea, if we will stop wars all over the world, the pollution will pretty much decrease by 50, 60, 70%, because the wars are the worst polluters in the world.
Yeah, and the money. I mean, if all of that money that was spent on armaments, I mean, you think of just the technology, the tanks, whatever they've got, the planes, if all of that money and technology was all very, very quickly engaged in recreating the planet, rather than chopping down trees, we could be planting, we could clean up the pollution pretty quickly. And just going back to why I did this garden, I wanted to demonstrate that in 50 years, we could regenerate the planet. And I have demonstrated that for me. And that is probably why I needed a fairly large piece of land, because I wanted to create an ecosystem that was self-sustaining. I now have fungi, I have lichen, I have moss, I have an ecosystem. So it's not a formal garden. It's not a garden that you can walk around in and go, oh my God, this is all totally landscape. It's all very looked after, but I have allowed nature to do its own thing and to create its own harmonious flow within its own. So the garden now has its own being. As I said, I can walk out there and merge my consciousness with its consciousness. But the really interesting thing is that it now has a consciousness, because it's become this unit of life. And so I think that, if we could change, or we talk about the 17 trillion from COVID, imagine spending $17 trillion on Gaia. Here you are, Gaia. What do you need? Here's $17 trillion worth of.
Sorry, it's not possible. Sorry, it's not possible.
Well, I think it will happen. I think it will.
Yes, Adrian, it's been a pleasure talking to you and
lovely.
knowing what you are doing and talking about your books. Thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, great. So if anyone wants to follow my work, adrianemery.com. I'm doing a blog once or twice a month where I try to give a bit of a different perspective on global events with a little bit of a cynicism and thrown in. And Tao Tuning is coming out in September the 17th. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Visit www.spiritualinspired.ca. Donate if you want to support the channel. And until next time, love and gratitude.